Hey you guys, it's definitely quite a fine day, and we are getting closer to the release of the full game of No Skin, and up in the No Skin unofficial Discord, it's just been we've been posting all the leaks and following it, and I definitely thought that'd be a perfect occasion for me to just talk about everything lore related about this game. No Skin, it's definitely like one of the most confusing and mysterious games you can play out there, and just for a demo, it's just riddled with so much content. So I just created an iceberg, and while I explain each tier, I would just play this game while I do that for some reason. But yeah, just to chill. So you could look at the whole iceberg. There's a lot of stuff there. Some of it is like a lot more packed in than the others, which have like a lot of elements. So I'm definitely going to take my time for that. But first up on the top of the iceberg, we have Noire. And I definitely have her there because she's essentially just us. She's the avatar. And she's definitely the best girl. There's not really anything that she's hiding from us because it's us. But there is some lore behind her. At the start of the game, we can see that in the intro cutscene, she's gotten back from a she works long hour shifts for a boss that treats her poorly, and she's just going straight for the alcohol down at the party. And I guess it is that alone which causes her to get what seems like an alcohol induced psychosis, which kind of triggers the events of the game, but I'll definitely get more into that. There's not really too much about her aside from her appearances in like the Dream Diaries, but I'll also get to those later. Moving up, we have the Sacrificial Sheep. I know what you're thinking. Why isn't it the Sacrificial Goat? Isn't that what it is? Well, yeah, you are absolutely right. So early in the game, it used to be a sheep, and one of the main reasons why I started going through the files of the game was just to retrieve that sprite of the sheep because I was actually surprised because I don't know about you, but I really like sheep. They're like my favorite animal, and seeing them just being replaced by the goat kind of like it's definitely like a I can see where the developer was going. It was a justified replacement, and I just kind of put it there on the list because its removal from the game did seem pretty sudden. And if you look at like the icon for the event where you do the sacrifice, it's still the sheep, which I found to be pretty interesting. But at least on the plus side, sheep's off the menu. Aw, just look at the adorable little sheepy, the fluffy little sheepy. I would never eat you. Oh, no, 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 no. You are the cutest little thing. Yes, you are. Give me a bite. Adorable little sheepy. Okay, next up on the list, we have your friends. And I think it's pretty condensed, but I basically mean like Rugs, Nadine. I don't know if I could really say Nadine is considered as a friend of yours, but there's also Trish and I'm definitely not gonna forget that. And Mary, I'm sorry. I just find they're honestly really interesting. They're at the core of No Skin, though they're like the people that you encounter the most. And one thing that definitely got me thinking is just the whole dynamic they have with each other. Because even down to the intro cutscene, there's drama going on. There's not too many positive vibes aside from Mary trying to break up the drama. But in a theory sense, it definitely got me thinking about like the seven deadly sins and how the game of No Skin definitely seems like it's purgatory. That was my Discord notification, don't worry. And I kind of just put together a little infographic, and it's very interesting because every character really has their own unique thing that you can explore in the game through all the dialogue. Like for Mary, I'm you don't have to take me at face value here, but these are some of the things that I wrote down. Mary kind of just develop it represents the traits of powerlessness and vulnerability, which can kind of come from what seems like, in the intro cut, like I'm really just gonna go into what I think here. Like your guess is good as any, and from what we see when you encounter her as an enemy, she definitely talks a lot about having bouts of jealousy and feeling inadequate, which we see in her dream diary. And it almost seems like Noire is the center of the attention in the intro cutscene, and That's definitely one thing that stands out. Like we see that in her enemy phases, as the phases progress, she gets more and more jealous, it seems. And I'm gonna go for the range here. Okay, that's just only 1 out of 5 of the friends, so I'm gonna move faster. Trish, I wouldn't say she's my favorite, but it's nice getting her dialogue. Between her, like in the entire intro cutscene, she's the only one who really has a positive relationship at the start, kind of doting on Ester. I thought that was really funny. And she is definitely representing the traits of pride and self-destruction because we see that she really does have these high expectations of herself, and she definitely feels like it's just kind of saying a little too much, but she kind of has like a complex going on where she has a need for approval among the friend group on how she dotes for Esther. And when you encounter her as an enemy in the game, she's definitely saying a lot of things like, "Oh, you think you're so much better than me," which yeah, definitely fits her. And then moving up, we have Rugs. I always thought he had green hair, but I don't I don't know if that's just me, but he kind of has the traits of rejection and worthlessness, which is not really something you think of the guy who's pretty much using his rhymes as either his next big talent or maybe a therapeutic tool. But a lot of the time we see him, he's kind of trying to impress us, or at least the character Noire. And in the intro cutscene, he's kind of approaching us, asking like to talk later, because if you just later in the dream diary, it's mainly between him and Noire kind of having a bit of a relationship, and I need to go back for that heart. And then next up, there's Nadine. She's the more mysterious character of the friend group because throughout the lore, we can see that she's not even there in the intro cutscene, but I believe that she has the traits of loneliness and non-existence because it really seems like she's the most isolated character. And when you encounter her in the game, she uses poison, which is kind of something that kills you from within, just like how a loneliness would to somebody. And I wouldn't really say she's in emotional pain or anything like that, but a lot of the times you encounter her, you just kind of seem to disregard her, which is not good, but it's just how the story plays out and just kind of something that is meant to stand out from her. And then for Esther, she was my favorite for a while, but it eventually did go to Nadine. But for Esther, I listed down that her inner struggles are more tied to insecurity and paranoia because a lot of the time you know she's beautiful. I get it, but she is like kind of obsessing. Oh, are my overalls too tight? Everybody think I'm just some ugly person, that those kind of things. I'm not really gonna say exactly what she says because it's not family friendly, but when you encounter her enemy, she has like part of her design is that she has her face is kind of gone. Not where Trish has that whole gaping hole, but it's part of her dialogue is saying that if there's that part about me that you really hate, I might as well just remove it. And that's just why she's known as the throat cutter in the game, because she's just feeling that she's backed into a corner, even though it's not really all that severe. And I already did explain how Nadine fits in with her poison and how she feels like in the game she becomes more of like a monster rather than a human, which kind of just exemplifies that feeling of non-existence that she has. And then for Rux, he's just a dude with a gun who oh, I dare I say, blown his brains out. But this lighter, the smoking, you can see that. He's just a guy really striving for closure. And even when he's a monster, he's still trying to do his same usual thing with the rhymes. And it's his design that kind of does confuse me a little more. It's a little more graphic, but it works nonetheless. And then for Trish, she has a gaping hole in her head, which kind of show the void that she has when it comes to all these high standards and whatnot, like a constant need for something. I'm not really explaining that part well, but it was sounded better in my head. And then for Mary, She's the most normal looking out of the group, but she uses a knife and she's really just gonna stab you to death. And I kind of just reminds me of like a psycho ex, what a psycho ex-girlfriend would do, and just how every one of these characters just has their own different look. You know, none of them are the same. There was that period where both Esther and Mary both dropped Nightshade, which kind of did make the game seem like a little repetitive, but they changed that to the blood pouch. That's really cool, and it's really interesting to see these characters stand out. I spent a lot of time. I know I said like in with the iceberg thing, things are going to be packed. That it's exactly what I mean. So next up, we have the Crimson Dancers, and I have them really high up because honestly, who doesn't like them? They're really funny. I'm pretty sure they are like the comedic relief for the whole game, aside from the little like unexpected events that catch you off guard, like some of which can be a little silly. But for them, I honestly like how they're friends with Rue at one point, like in one time when you talk with them, you know, and it's really adorable. They're just under the employ of the moon goddess, and they just really it's not exactly linear, but you know that they know their purpose, and go to them when you need help. And there's not it's their dialogues can get really interesting when you really like decipher what they're talking about. They're all the things that they mention, the rhino carcass, the painting of made of blood, that kind of stuff. You really think you kind of just brush it off because they're not normal, but they're really just talking about the origin of the world, and I'll get to that later. Also again really silly. I'm being shot at. It's really fun to see have them there, and I've really been getting all the health. I need to change that. I'm pretty sure that one more thing I want to mention about the Crimson Dancers is that like their connection to the moon goddess is pretty unclear, but they appear just about everywhere, like even in the most unforeseen of places, and I think that's pretty cool. I'm missing the point, but that guy can run away. You know, they're triplets, and I'll just brush it off right there. I'm sorry. Next up, we have the Sprite Overhaul, and you might be confused by what I mean, but they're earlier in the game's development. The dev Noeye-soft, he actually worked on like a whole new set of sprites, like a whole new different design for the game, and it looked a lot more like a little more realistic, a lot less simple, a lot less simplified, more detail, that kind of thing. And I honestly want to give big kudos for that because like this guy really went through all the effort to try to make the game look like better in the eyes of the players, and it turns out like simple was really the best way to go about it. And I honestly really admire that. I don't really think we're gonna get a version of the game where those sprites are back, but they're still there in the files if you ever want to see them. But I need to go for something other than health. I've been doing that a lot. The next up we have is the Skinless Son. It is surprising to see him this high, but there's not really that much that we know about him. You get him when you buy the red room upgrade with the lunar fragments, and honestly, when you see the area at first glance, you really don't want to go there. Like it's only a less than 20% chance to get something that you'd really need out of it. Because if you encounter him, you have to just escape, and it's pretty difficult to do that. But in terms of his lore, like he seems to be the Red Room really just seems to be like tied to the origin of the world, and that the Skinless Son serves the No Skin Man, which honestly I really like that. You know, the No Skin Man having a son, yet we really don't know much more about the No Skin Man's connection, whether or not he really is connected to the Red Room. But aside from that, there's not really much that you can decipher from him. He does have like his design. It's really simplified. He's just floating bones with the triangle. And later in the tier list, I'm definitely going to talk about the triangle because it's definitely really he's like one of the only characters that has it, and it's pretty really significant. Oh my gosh, wait. I gotta stop. Oh, I can't shoot the raccoons. I just gotta go. Oh my goodness. Okay, next up we have the leaks. And by that I mean just mostly the teasers for the new game. I want to I think it's interesting to talk about because some of them are like really game changing. When you look at the leaks, you can see a whole new kind of design. It's a lot more mysterious, and there's a decaying fetus that you have to fight apparently. And yeah, it's a lot of fun on the Discord, on the No Skin Discord, where we would kind of decipher what's different. Sometimes there would be videos that look like just regular gameplay, but there's actually a hidden change that might be difficult to detect at first. And yeah, I would definitely say that there's been a lot of nerfs to like, oh my gosh, bro, like the Colts robe, if it's one of like the rare items you can obtain, and that item had already been hard nerfed to be like not even close to what it used to be. It's like a bottom tier item now. You can trade it, but that's just one example of one of the nerfs to the game. There's a lot more nerfs coming, and I feel that there's like a good reason for that. Like I did do feel that the Colt's robe and the rosary also being changed seemed to be pretty oppressive, but those are like really game changing items, especially when you're like really struggling in a run. And you see that a lot of the enemies have been buffed. You can see that there's a lot more changes, a lot more attacks, a blue shield. I honestly don't really know where the direction is headed, but I know that it's going to be crazy good. Okay, we are done with the first layer. Okay, moving on up on the next list, we are gonna start off with the unexpected events. Oh my gosh, you really don't know about them. Like when you start the game, it's only a 1% chance to trigger, and you never think about it like ever. But once you do get it, it's for the first time, it's gonna catch you off guard. But every time after that, it's just gonna be really annoying. Some of most there's like 10 in total, and the majority of them really are just those kind of jump scares, but some of them are actually really interesting, and that's kind of the reason why they're on this list. For one of the unexpected events, it's like a fake title screen, end screen, where you hear the outro music, the names, no skin flashing down. But one thing that really catches your eye is that if you look at the very bottom before it cuts out, it has these names of the Crimson Dancers there as like part of the development team, which is really silly. And that they also have last names. There's like Pat Nino as one of them. And the Discord is definitely thinking like, oh my gosh, is that their actual names? But I'm pretty sure it was just a laugh from the developer. And a lot of the other ones are exactly that. In the next unexpected event, there's the one where everything was just a prank, and I'm pretty sure that's the ending that everybody wanted, but unfortunately, that's not the case for a game as serious as this one. But there's also like in these little unexpected events, there's these a lore like you get lore drops, which is unexpected, just as it is in the name. And I definitely want to throw them in there because they're one of the most mysterious mechanics in the game. They're definitely unique, but once you get them after the first time, it's gonna get annoying because you don't get anything out of it. And it's just a waste of progress unless you really were just in a really bad situation. You needed that skip. And yeah, one another thing that's interesting about them is that they're the no they are the doing of the no skin man. You hear him talking and he's kind of just laughing at you, which it's I guess the only thing we can really get in terms of finding out his real personality aside from his demands, but I think it's a really welcome thing to the game, even though it's just a demo. Moving on, we have the Cult of the False God. Like honestly, like I starting off with the game, I always felt like it was odd that the Moon Goddess would reward you for disrupting this cult, which it really seems similar to the religions we have today, and that's kind of what the Discord has theorized on how it's just a culmination of all of the religions that have existed throughout the world, which kind of is more geared toward Christianity in the game with all the biblical references. But that's really just how I interpreted it. It may seem like its own standalone thing in the game, but I definitely feel that it's like a reflection of real world religious groups and whatnot, and how our earth is just shrouded with so many. You don't really know what to consider to be real or not. It is just thing and the whole idea of spirituality and trying to be absolved. Like a lot of the time, you can either choose to join, like support the cult, or to completely disrupt them. And either way, you get rewarded, which is something that I find interesting. And it also kind of like when you think about the no skin man as a whole, like I might talk about him later, but he really just doesn't take any side at all. He's one of those unique characters that really doesn't have any background when every other character really seems is just has to do with the cult of the false god. And of course the false god as in possibly god or just anything else, but it truly doesn't matter. Next up we have the long-gilled fish ramblings. I've paused for a while. It's gonna go with, oh yeah, I definitely need this. The long-gilled fish ramblings. Every time you visit him, it doesn't really, I don't think it matters which region it is, whether or not it updates, but he speaks a lot of gibberish and it's really hard to follow. It's really whimsical and elegant the way he says it, but he talks about like a pond, a leaf in the pond, and a lot of things about mixing jars, and it really just seems to be his own philosophical take on his own existence. It's really odd seeing that in a game where, it's a game and you have this character, a fish, who's just kind of just aware of questioning everything that's going on, even though, it is all tied to game mechanics, and it's all really interesting. Like, I can't really go more in depth on what he says. Oh, I don't have a gun. But just the main takeaways is it's just silly seeing him contemplate the meaning of life, and he kind of talks about you a bit as well on how your journey is just the significance of that, and you're just taking in the efforts and doing what nature is not exactly intended, not intended by nature. By that I mean it is in our nature, but when it comes to like all the crazy stuff that goes on, it's just along those lines. And he does mention that all civilizations come to an end, and he kind of just alludes to the idea that, the cult of the false god was going to fall, and that it was inevitable that it's going to fall. Just seeing that you're already there disrupting it, and it kind of just ties to, the rise and fall of religions in our real world. There's a history for that with the ancient civilizations and whatnot. They all rise and fall, and I think that's a really interesting thing to note. Next up, we have the fragments, and this is both like the Crimson fragments and the Lunar fragments. The main reason they're on this list is one of the final bosses toward the end, before you face the no-skin man, is the exquisite corpse. And well, it's cool to note that he has a relationship with the long-gilled fish, teaching him all that philosophical stuff. So he's kind of just carrying it on from there. He questions like, what are the Crimson fragments? Oh, I need to get that. And it really gets you thinking because it makes you aware that even the enemies don't know what they are. And with their shape, with them being triangles, just how they are with the upside down triangle symbol, it really does seem like it's just what dead enemies drop. It's exactly that and nothing more. I don't think they can be made, but they're really just the essence of these enemies that are just bartered as currency, just trading away life. And as for the lunar fragments, it's part of the moon goddess, and it's nice to see that they're willing to trade them to you for some goodies, with the more hard sought out fragments. Next up, we have the dream world, and what I mean by this is, it's essentially how Noire enters this, the whole realization of truth thing. It's all just a whole different world, the truth being laid out. And I say it's a dream world because a big theme with this game is just, being in a state of dreaming and waking and not really being able to tell what's going on. And one of the big questions surrounding this topic is whether or not what's going on is real or fake. Oh, I'm playing as Luna now, but I would definitely say that the answer is like both yes and no, because it's a real, like, the context of this game is definitely like centered around the real world. And when it comes to the dream world, it's a dream. You can't really expect it to be real, but in the context of this game, it is trying to like reflect the world as it is now. You have all this corruption, you have like kind of, there's a lot of things on in the world. It's cruel, and this dream world is kind of seems to tear that apart. And the idea of finding truth through a dream is pretty odd, but there was more I wanted to say about this, but I suppose I'll just get back to it later. But I'm going to stick with that answer because a lot of things about the game still don't make sense. It is still a demo, but still with a lot to unpack. And it really seems like everything else, it's not exactly in Noire's, it is in Noire's head, but it's not her own kind of dream. She's not really in control, which kind of is like one of the big factors of this game. Oh wait, I need to move. Like, yeah, I was having the screen block there, but yeah, that's pretty much my take on that. I think it's really interesting. Not like it makes you think about like that anime where if you go in the game and you die in real life, I mean, die in the game, you die in real life, that kind of thing. But that's not what goes on in, um, No Skin. One thing that makes it unique about being a dream is that if you die, or do anything bad happens in a dream, you can always just go back and do it again, just as you would. And, dreams don't necessarily die out till you wake up, that is. Next up, and the final thing, no, not the final thing, we have corruptions. And by this I mean the corrupted friends upgrade from the mood goddess, and also like that trigger, that jump scare that you get before you face one of the secret enemies. I think those are fairly interesting because like those are really the only parts of the game aside from what you'd get from Roots Route, where you can actually see the game world just tearing up. And it's honestly, it's the scare factor that you get from those small little elements that make it stand out. I'm gonna lock it for this part really quick because I can't really see too much of my screen right now. Never mind. But it's honestly really creepy. It's great that this upgrade has like a use to it where you get to get more items the more you encounter, Rugs and all the other characters. And it's really nice to know that it was considered to have to make them like gradually change as the more times you encountered them. I don't know why it wasn't really considered to be done by default, but it's really great nonetheless that it's in the game. I think it's really cool, it's creepy, and it kind of does show that the characters really are changing before your eyes the longer you're there, the longer you're progressing. And it definitely, it seems gruesome and lets you know that you're in for quite a journey. And the corruption textures themselves, it uses like just textures from a bunch of melded things together, and I think that's a really cool effect. Nothing like too crazy, but just the whole idea of there being a scare factor. Okay, next up we have the clock, which you have to buy before you're able to encounter it, but I think it's one of like it's definitely something you need to get in every other run because you get a lot from it. But it's the biggest factor that lets you know that tying to the dream world that it all really is a dream. I did post a theory on whether or not I believed it was all truly a dream, whether or not it was purgatory, but in a real sense it really does seem to be just both. And with the clock there, it kind of just shows that. I might be stuck here. I'm just gonna move through this really quick. And it is very odd seeing a clock kind of attack you, but I think it is really well done with the idea of waking up from a nightmare, that sort of sense. And it kind of is reminding you that you really are just dreaming. and you're not in control. And yeah, it's definitely something I'd want to throw in because it's definitely like something that can trigger something in you. Yeah, so moving on from that, I believe that's all for the second tier. So we're gonna move on to the third tier. And the first thing on that list is the default enemies. So when you once you pull the big brain move in this game, which is like going past the threshold, whether before you encounter the no-skin man, if you just pass 100, you end up in this weird world where everything's just labeled as default. And one thing that's really interesting about the enemies there is that they're pretty much harmless. They do talk, and you're able to actually kill them and get fragments from them, which is even though they're like practically NPCs. And one thing that's really interesting about them is that they're essentially scrapped sprites of existing characters, like alternates from what it seems like. And a lot of the interesting ones just look a lot scarier than, the original. Like you even have a version of the no skin man that is smiling, which is definitely jarring, and it adds into that whole vibe that you are not in a place that you should be in. There's not really too much significance for them aside from the fact that they're just a really nice add-in that are really creepy. All right, next thing up we have the strange backgrounds, and by this I mean like once you progress through the game, it's randomly generated when it's like an unexpected event, but it's a certain background for all the enemies that you encounter, and one of them is a painting of a Virgin Mary, which kind of connects like the whole religious theme of this game and spirituality. And it's like we can make it out as being the Virgin Mary, it's an iconic thing, and to just see it there in the world. And I actually made it past this part, but I find that to be really interesting. And once you get it to later segments of the game, the backgrounds just get stranger and stranger, as if you're now no longer in a house. Suddenly you're on underwater inside of a giant eye, or oh my gosh, I can't even go on from there, but it just gets weirder from there. And I think it's just the explanation behind that is nothing really makes sense in the game. There's a lot of references to like like a lot of biblical references, a lot of references of just being unaware of your current state. You're no longer on Earth, it seems like. You're just like drifting along limbo. And I think that's a really interesting thing to note, just the directions that this game goes in. So next up we have the mysterious characters. So this one's going to be a pretty big one because there's a lot to cover. So in one of the unexpected events, you get that the pranked one where you apparently everything was a prank. Your friends were in on it while you were drunk and Rugs dressed up as a no-skin man, and you really fell for it like a fool. But one thing that makes this event stand out compared to everything else, all the other ones, is that there's a lore drop by Mary where she mentions that her sister also helped in the effort, which is insane because a 1% unexpected chance, which is a 1 out of 10 out of the other uh, possibilities that you could get, and there's just this lore drop all of a sudden that's just thrown out there like nothing. Like this was when we the Discord kind of talked about this, like this was huge, and yet it's just so rare to like find out, like to be able to see and read. But when she mentions her sister, it kind of just tied to the mysterious girl who you see in the first zone, where she's also in Mary's room. She looks exactly like Mary, but she has red hair. And for a while, this Discord just thought that it was Nadine's sister because of the red hair, or Mary from an alternate dimension, because there is like a thing with the game where there are characters emerging from different worlds, different dimensions. That's kind of the thought we got, or maybe even a scrapped version of Mary that was just thrown in as an extra. But it that one little piece of lore was just enough to tell us that it's very likely to be Mary's sister. And it does make sense because it doesn't really seem like in the intro cutscene that Nora really knows everybody. She knows her friends, but it doesn't seem like she might have ever met Mary's sister. But there's a lot of things that kind of support this. They both drop our source of fragments found in Mary's room, and they're wearing the exact identical clothing. Which, hey, I'm glad we didn't have to roll with some other thing. I'm actually happy that we were able to find that out. Another mysterious character is the girl who saw the light, which is in phase 3. And when you talk to Nadine in her form in that area, one of her dialogues says that, like, forever regret the day that my sister saw the light, which is pretty much alluding to her. A lot of if you go inside the dream diary for Nadine, one segment is her talking about her sister and how she's at her recital. And from what I was able to grasp from it is that just from with the struggles that Nadine has, it also includes just having that feeling that her sister is better than her in a way where she's, the friend group is more interested in her than they are in Nadine in a sense. And I really like how she's pretty much like an insert in the game in the dream world now where she is, the girl of the light, basically the opposite of Nadine, or they just have completely different, you know, like it's hard for me to pull the word out, but they're just at completely different sides, weighing down different things. Where Nadine is fallen into, what seems like non-existence, while the girl who saw the light is just kind of a beacon of hope from what it seems like. And when you look at their sprites, they don't look alike at all. But one thing I did want to note is that, you know, if you look at Fire Emblem Three Houses, I wouldn't really want to spoil too much of the lore there, but one of the characters, Byleth, when they are enlightened, their hair changes color to be like, it goes from like a dark blue to like a more of a glowing green. And I kind of feel that that's exactly what happened with Nadine's sister, where when she was transformed by the light, the hair color changes, and it even seems like she's been blinded by the light itself. So that was one interesting thing to clear up. But that's one thing that I do believe, because a lot of the lore seems to connect to her being Nadine's sister, even though they don't really look alike. Just her being the more gifted version of her. And then the next character that we have is, it's if you look in Noire's dream diary, there's an NPC kind of just comes up and starts talking to her and like asking how she's doing, if she's okay, just borderline concerned, and isn't really given a name. And the whole interaction that they have is just really, it goes by really quick, and you can't even tell what's going on, but you learn that there's a conflict going on and that he's likely a relative of Noire's who's genuinely concerned. So in the game's files, it is revealed that his name is Zig, which doesn't, it's not very odd. You have a guy named Drug, so I wouldn't really think too much about it, but isn't necessarily what I believe his name is really set out to be. But it, I do want to, it just seems plausible that he is Noire's brother. Oof. Because later on, I'll explain more about the Dream Diaries, but it really does seem like he and Noire are in the same boat. They both exemplify the same kind of worry, and they mention a certain someone that they both know well, and you can just see the trauma in his eyes. Like that, that's a kind of a level of caution that only a family member would have. And then for the final mysterious character, I want to talk about the Doorman, because when it comes to his design, he seems to be really linear. He's just one of those rare characters that gives you a really OP item. And when it comes to like any lore implications, you can only just get it based off of his name, not really his look or the whole method for getting his encounter. But he really does seem to be just like as his name suggests, and you really get nothing more about him. He, if you in the game's files, there's kind of he is kind of there in some of the concept art as if he was to play a more significant role, but it doesn't really seem like he was given that kind of treatment. And he is really one of the only characters who just kind of flees from you and doesn't want anything to do with it. Like he really is just kind of independent, and he's like seemingly like the gatekeeper of all the areas that you enter, which, the bunch of keys and also that item being like one of the most OP in the whole game. But I just felt that he was worth mentioning because even though he doesn't play that much significance, he's a really interesting source and like a necessary component if you want to have a good run. Before I get to this, hold on. There we go. Shoot my gun. Never mind. Something closed there. But that's for the mysterious character so far. And next up, we have the No-Skin Man, which, the whole game is kind of centered around him. Yeah, we know next to nothing about him. And that's kind of the point. I think he's one of the more well-designed characters because he really is just someone who seems to have lost their identity just as a whole. Like every shred of being, they're still, a man, but all we ever know him is as a no-skin man, and the demo sort of just cuts before he reveals the truth to us. But he's basically the person behind, like, he pulled us into the whole game, and it seems like his power rivals even the moon goddesses. And he's really interesting is that the only connection he seems to have is, the Skinless Son, whom of which you get out of this, we don't even see him interact with. We just know that he's there. And just how he teases you throughout the game, it poses like a really interesting dynamic where you feel that it's hard to tell whether or not he's in denial of the truth and that he may never actually recover his skin. In one of the game teasers, it is showed that like there is an option where you can give him his skin, which kind of throws everything I thought about him out of the window. But ultimately, it's just a really odd way to look at him. Him really just having lost his skin is just being this being that he's not aligned with the cult of the false god or anything. He's just on his own vendetta to just kind of reclaim his sense of self. It's you have all the cult of the false god, and you have even the moon goddess who offers salvation. Yet he's just there. I'm gonna do this. But yeah, and then every time you defeat him, he just comes back, he gets stronger just in the mechanics of the demo. I honestly think that's like a really interesting aspect because it may seem that he can never truly die. He's really just forever there to try to reclaim what he feels is the only thing that really gave him purpose. And I don't know, but it makes sense that you wouldn't trade ultimate power for a cost so great as losing your skin. Very like there's still a lot we will be able to see a lot more about him in the full release of the game, but just as it stands in the demo, he's just really distant. Next up, we have the biblical references, and these are all the characters throughout the game that are look like they're ripped straight from Earthbound and whatnot, but they're actually like really known when it comes to like mythology and religion. And that would be like the crawling fossil, the two-headed horse, the extermination angel. Like these are the elements in No Skin that really make it, tie in the whole aspect of the finding the truth because it's not just some regular dream where you're getting all of these things coming after you. But that was close. And they're just not on your side. They're all rooted with the cult of the false god, which is, a lot of references to real religions, with with the burned alive in the files, it's known as the Holy Spirit, which kind of changes my whole perspective on that character, on that boss. And it makes sense as to why they didn't go with that name, because it would be pretty crazy. Like, oh my gosh, I just killed the Holy Spirit. But there's that really shouldn't surprise you if it's no skin, where you can even kill a decaying fetus at some point in one of the leaks. But I just think it's really fascinating because it's more about that spirituality, that religiousness, and you're just seeing it in the game there as being like, hey, you thought this was fake. This guy's real, and he's trying to kill you, but you can recruit one of them. I don't really know too much about the details for most of them, like for the exterminating angel. Like these are genuinely characters that you can look up on your own time and learn about, and just to see them in the game. Next up, we have the Dream Diaries, and these are actually like the biggest lore drops that you can get in this game. It if you look at the base game, the dialogues really don't tell you enough. Like sometimes you may get the occasional tip that can help you, but aside from that, it's the Dream Diaries that really fill you in on these characters. There's only two of them that have been updated, Mary's and Rug's, to have like a completely different look to them, but for the ones that currently exist, it really just seems to be that aspect where it's real, but then it becomes fake as the dream world just kind of cracks in. You're having a conversation about with Nadine talking about her sister and her offering you coffee. What a nice friend. But then it just cutting to, oh yeah, I wish you never existed. Like what on if you see that for the first time, it really has you scratching your head. Like, do your friends really think that way about you? And it is just that whole aspect of the dream world and the truth where it just seems to be exaggerating, where it separates the good and the evil out of everybody and keeps only the evil, where you just see transform into these monsters which used to be your friends, and no matter how many times you kill them, they just come back more disfigured, that sort of thing. And it just raises the question on whether or not, well, I'm approaching a pretty difficult boss battle, but I'm still going to talk about this. Whether or not these are really your friends, or if they're just these monsters that have just taken their form. And again, it's this may not be a very satisfying answer, but it is seemingly both. It is the friends that you know, but it's only these monsters that have their memories. It's kind of just the manifestation of all the hatred within them. Like everybody would have their own negative thoughts for sure, but when you are in this world where all of those are just multiplied by 10 all of a sudden, and your friends just want to murder you and whatnot, it's really crazy. And it just about showing your colors, even though it's not exactly you that's there. Just these monsters just kind of taking over that aspect of you. And that's what goes on for a majority of the Dream Diaries, but for Rugs and Mary's, like those are equal. They're both like completely different things that are really stand out. So for Mary's, you play as the role of Noire, and you seem to it gives you that whole cutscene where you're actually entering her head, entering her dream, and it's the same thing where you're instead of talking with this monster, you're fighting them. This is tight. Need to get this. And there's that whole confession at the end of Mary's Dream Diver after a really difficult fight that's kind of just built to be down to like a barely winning. You end up, she confesses to you, and it really doesn't, it's hard to tell whether or not it's really Mary, but oh wow, I got that on the first try. But she confesses that she thought that you were the one, but you're just another worm, and that life is not fair. And it really ties to Mary's whole personality, where she feels jealous and that she feels that she's inadequate, and this monster kind of just manifesting those feelings that she has towards you. I think when you say it, it makes it more confusing, but it still sheds like the whole character of Mary. And that's kind of the same thing for Roots Die, where you're actually playing in his perspective, and again, it's the same thing where it starts out where it's real, but it's fake. Where Ruggs is, he gets to know Noire. Like, I thought that cutscene at first was ridiculous. Like, oh my gosh, this dude just shows up on a beach and he gets like this girl's number. And she goes up to him and just immediately asks him to a party, despite them not really knowing that much about each other at first. Like, there's no way you'd be seeing that happen in 2025. No way. But then again, you never know. But like, it's definitely like that is something that really can't happen. So I'm just gonna roll with that. But later on in the game, it just seems that as the day progresses, Ruggs just it seems that Noire just skips out on Ruggs. He's suddenly just there alone at the beach. He's unsure of what happened to Noire, who has just seemed to have disappeared on him right next to him, even though they hit it off at the bar and they really got to know each other. He wasn't really given that closure. And it's not exactly the dream world slipping in, but it's just more of his own anxiety, that feeling where you're just left standing there, like feeling as if you were rejected. And it ties into the whole worthlessness trait. Like, he kind of just feels like he was used by Noire to just um allow some other boy to not hit on her, just to act as her boyfriend. And then that's it, things are going so well, and then it's just she's gone. And it's kind of just that where it sparks that whole encounter where Rugg suddenly just jumps into freezing cold water for some reason, and he faces this manifestation. Oh, I'm not dead by that, but it's interesting because you can't fight while you're underwater. It's clearly fake, but this is really just Rugg's own anxiety attacking back at him. This feeling that he's not worth it. That the feeling that Noire wasn't really. I wouldn't really go on from there, but in the end, you can either choose to pull the trigger or shoot yourself, which I don't really think is all too significant. It's just the kind of the portal that lets you either see the original Dream Diary for Ruggs or just push on from there. But it's interesting to see this inner battle that Ruggs has, even though it's not really Noire. It is pretty hard to like wrap your head around, but it really is just about these inner struggles that these characters have. Like in the intro cutscene, and even when you encounter Ruggs after you defeat the clock, he really is just trying to meet up back with you and to get closure on what really happened, but you really just brush it off. You don't want him to mess it up. And it's never good to leave somebody seeking closure like that. Like the character, like whether or not you're playing as Noire or Luna, the dialogue that the friends say are just completely directed toward you and vilifying you. And one of the things that Rugg says is that you never really cared about him. And just all of those things that just mm, show how these characters really feel, even though it's not really them, it's just those husks. I talked for a little too long with that, and wasn't I? No, I wasn't. All right, so next up we have Phase 3, which is the new update for the beta 0.6 where you get access to the third level. And on a funny note, like before this update came out, like I was looking through the files of the most recent release and I see these like the Phase 3 looks, the way that Ruggs looks at all the other characters. I'm wondering, oh my gosh, these are so scary. Like, I'm actually glad that these didn't make it into the game because I think would have been too much to handle that. And just a week later, this update drops and they were actually put into the game. Oh man. But the whole thing is that it transitions from the house and then now you're just in this reddish world, which really just seems like the underworld. Like what kind of dream world has you going into this whole limbo where it really seems like you're there. And all of the levels go from rooms to these weird messages like the eyes, the you know the river, the sea of blood and whatnot, and even on the moon at one point. It's very unusual, and you can see that all the your friends are just seem to be overwhelmed by their own suffering at that point. They've transformed to these really horrible monsters, and I think it's worth placing it at this level on the iceberg because while is just as confusing, it really just shows how far you're going and how much the truth really just points to the all the cruel things about the world and how there's corruption and evil, which, religions would just stay as a one-way ticket to purgatory, which the game kind of just paints a picture of. All right, so that completes the third one. I've been talking for a pretty long while, but for the next one, in the fourth layer, we have the upside down triangle system symbol. I'm sure you're wondering, like, what exactly I mean by that before. Well, I think I can find it right here. Yeah, like just see these particles right here. They're like these red triangles. They're like the shape of the fragments, and these are like basically the symbol that show this that represent this entire. You even see that triangle right there as I die. The they alone represent this whole game. They have this their own significance to them, and it seems like they could either mean be a symbol of the origin of the world, of life, of rebirth, of power. You see these characters that have them just on like you have Meadow, you have the Skinless Son, you have Phase 3 Ester who just have this symbol on them. And it just completely ties to the Red Room, which is another area in the game that's just very much tied to purgatory and the afterlife. So I think it's just really interesting to note because you see this everywhere. Even when you like confirm an option in this game, it's that same triangle. And oh man, I honestly lost count of how many times I've been here. And so next up on our list we have the Moon Goddess, which does seem odd to see them like this far down on the tier list, but one of the main questions in the No-Skin unofficial Discord was people that I know asking like trying to determine whether or not the Moon Goddess is evil. Because you can see that they have their own motive. They're trying to disrupt the cult of the false god and rewarding you for doing so. And so a whole lot of other things. But ultimately, I would say that that's not the case. I don't think the moon goddess is evil. Okay, I'm just gonna no. But the whole vibe that you get with the moon goddess is that they're actively trying to help you. Sure, they just pulled you into this and just have you as one of her warriors, from what it seems in a battle that you yourself are not really sure of, which may seem wrong, but in some of the leaks for the game, you can see that it's all leading toward this grand journey where you are the only one who can save what's going on in the world. And I think that's a really heroic kind of thing. And every time you encounter the moon goddess, even though you don't see her at any other point of the game, it's calm music, it's chill vibes. Like, oh, hey, you died. That's not bad. It's a means to an end, that sort of thing. And just the whole, it makes sense for why the moon goddess would have the Crimson Dancers there to help her out because they kind of just have that same, you know, encouraging personality. But so I don't really see anything inherently evil about the moon goddess. It would be really out of character for them to just turn on you, to be honest. But there's all that shady stuff that's and how it seeks to achieve, whatever the purpose of the game is as you reach the end, but it really just seems to be genuine, at least for how it looks in the demo. All right, so next up we have the Noeye-soft Boss, the little self-insert that goes on with the developer of the game, which is also known as Noeye-soft. And in one of the unexpected events, you get this weird flashing cutscene where you can see a man just sort of there, and he's brandishing a knife that he just pulls on his own eyes, which is pretty gruesome to see at first, but it actually is kind of the only piece of lore that we get behind this boss, which is ultimately that same person. It's not really too much to think about, but the one thing that I immediately thought about is just the idea of the truth being overwhelming. Sometimes it can be too overwhelming, or sometimes you can have too much of the truth where you feel that a sacrifice is necessary, like such as your own eyes, even to really help you better understand the truth. And you can see where that went for him, right? But it is really any more darker than that. When you speak to him, he's telling you, "Hey, what are you doing here?" As like what a game developer would really tell any other player just trying to break the game. I think it's really cool. It's not really too significant to like all the other characters in the game, but it really is just like to like once you get out of the game, he's just there as like just sort of an obstacle, and I think that works really well. I'm think it again. I think it's really cool. I don't need to kill these enemies. And seeing all those dev powers just kind of show through. All right, so next up we have the deer-headed man, which is actually it is surprising not seeing him at the very bottom of the iceberg, but I will get to that. He is just the one of the most mysterious characters in the whole game, where you really don't know anything about them and how their connection to Root. You learn later on through Root's route that he and Root are from the same world, well, a different world, but in the same world, and that he's really just out to get Noire. Like, I mean, Luna. It's honestly like you can't even tell this guy's motives. He's just so sinister, and at the same time, he's like fair. And the whole later on, I am going to be talking about like breaking down this game, Livid Meadow, and how his appearance here kind of just helps better explain who he is. But it really just seems like he is a manifestation of Root's own guilt. It is not something that you can tell at all from the game No-Skin itself, and the developer did note that these two games aren't exactly like it's not you're not really thinking about a sequel and a prequel. These games stand out on their own. They may have the same characters, but it's not like completely connected. While it does help you understand the themes of this game, which is like discovering the truth. Ooh, I need to make sure I get this. Like the biggest correlation I can make to the deer-headed man is that he really seems to be like Pyramid Head from the franchise Silent Hill, where he's just the manifestation of James Sunderland's guilt, and it's really hard to tell what his motives are because I haven't really played the games, but it really seems like he's trying to help in a sense. He's like borderline evil. He's trying to kill you, but at the same time, he kind of feels that it's necessary. And once I reach the end of this game, I will be able to get into more detail than that. But when it comes to his dialogue, it's honestly really interesting because he mentions a whole list of events that you don't see in the game itself that you see here. And I should be doing damage instead. What was I saying? Oh, right. No, wait a minute. Give me a moment. Yeah, he says like even when you defeat him, and you try to figure out what his identity is, it honestly falls on it's a failed effort because not only does he fade away before you can do that, but he said it almost seems like he's salty in that when you defeat him and he's just, oh, you'll never figure out who I am. I could be you for all you know. It just kind of has his way of brushing it off his own defeat, but he really seems to be telling the truth here, because he really is just a manifestation. He's not really a certain character, another character, because seeing that the lore is pretty limited in this game, it's really hard to make a connection on who he really is. You could say that in this game he could be Door, but that really does not seem to be the case. He really is just a figment in Root's sort of journey through whatever goes on here in the game. It is really hard to wrap around, but he really just seems like, yes, he truly isn't really existing. He isn't really his standalone character, but he kind of just symbolizes like finding the truth. It's being there, it's the obstacle in your journey and helping you kind of escalate, realizing what had really happened. Like all the things that are confusing about this game in particular, like, I'm pretty sure Root is just as confused, but it is the deer-headed man that's just kind of jogging her memory on all the events that occurred on with the tree. It doesn't really make sense as to why he's fighting her, but this does just kind of add into, pro- progressing the plot and bringing more things to light. So next up, we have Root, who, yeah, is right on track. So in the lore of this game, you can definitely say that she is a detective. It would seem pretty odd if she really was just a civilian, um, just exercising her Second Amendment rights. But when you in the screen in the menu for this game where you select a character, there's these specific names where Luna is the true Luna, and then for Root, she is the weapon of justice, which kind of just adds into her identity of being a detective, delivering justice. And it's really interesting because she follows a unique route in this game where she's following the exact same, like it's just a repeat of the events here, but more condensed, and it feels that some things are a little different. And one thing that really stands out is the phone call, the children of Root. Like here you see these robots that are out to get you, and suddenly in No Skin they're just labeled as the children of Root. Like that's certainly no child, but it's sort of just alluding to the idea to when you reach, like in this current boss battle with Meadow, who looks exactly like Root, she is also just seemingly a manifestation brought to life, just as the deer-headed man is. Just in the sense of not exactly Root's guilt, but the kind of life that she lost, where if you can see, Door isn't really on this iceberg because he's not really part of No Skin. He's just completely absent from the game. But one big part of that was just that whole lore drop with the cutscenes in this game where Meadow and Door planned on reuniting and being happy together, even possibly starting a family, which is something that I'm kind of just throwing out as an interpret as a guess or a theory, but does seem to be like something you can believe because she's wearing a wedding dress from what it seems like. Yeah, and it's just really interesting, just her whole route just being more confusing and more tied to the after what seemed to be the afterlife for Root. Like it seems like she was just she's still going through the process of the afterlife, not really realizing that what she's done, what has being complete, like almost like she's lost her memory. Like you get the phone calls and you even get the headless man who, yes, he really does look like Door, but you see that in this game there are two different characters here that are named Door. So it is like, well, it's late revealed later on that his name is also Door, but you can instantly just infer that it's the same character, and it's just that whole figment of the life that Root or Meadow could have had. Meadow as in the happiest memory that Root shared with Door before what was possibly the last time that she saw him before he may have even died. And it's the phone calls is kind of being an echo of the outside where Root is just reminded of what she's lost. The voice behind the phone calls could just it I at first, we thought that it was just all Door, but as you saw it's the toward the advancement of this boss battle, it's other characters talking. You saw Luna back there just delivering one of the lines that you get from the phone calls. And the whole world is ending kind of idea where it's just reached that point where Root is really reaching the end in terms of her arc. Not exactly, it is pretty much the world around her, but it seems like for her case, she's in the afterlife, and she seems to have died by being hung by the the big tree. Which honestly, I thought this was really confusing for me because when you look at the whole dynamic that Root and the deer-headed man have, I instantly just interpreted that he was the one who had killed her or something like that. But it really does seem like it seemed possible that Root had committed suicide after she was informed of possibly the death of Door. Before I get to the breakdown of this whole game, I know it all seems like really confusing, but it's a lot to unpack. And Root, she shares the exact same qualities with being able to have the upgrades, the gun, and even just the confusion that you get when every time you talk to her on how she just doesn't know where she is, like, and that whole realization at the end of everything that's happened, what there was lost. I just think it's a really great arc that you get in a demo, like in a demo, bro. Like that is just insane. Yeah, run a really designed character, and possibly the favorite character to play as in the entire Discord. All right, so moving on to the next here, we're getting to the interesting stuff. We have the real Mary. So if you play as Luna and you go reach -%, which is where you go what seems to be like before the game even started. Like when I first got this, I was thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm free. Like I made it out of this game." But apparently, you end up running into the real Mary instead, which is really confusing. What on earth happens here? Instead of being free, you just run into the real Mary? Like, is it really the real Mary as in the Mary we know and love? But apparently what's going on here is actually the game turning into a pre-development phase where you've reached a state where the game is still in development. Like you went back in time and all the battles just don't seem to be ready yet. And it's Mary for the same reason, and why it's called the real Mary is because in the game's files, if you try to look at all of the encounters and all the files for that, the placeholder sprite for all of them is Mary. like like any encounter that you get in this game, if before it's even made, it has to have a placeholder, and the sprite that's used for that is Mary. And I honestly think that's a really cool detail to just have that you reach that point in the game where all that's really there is just that placeholder that it can actually actively does try to permanently put you down. And yeah, again, that's really cool. It's not the Mary we all know and love, but it is just that part of the game. All right, so next up we have, wait, I need to look at that. We have her. So once you reach like the end of the threshold, when you're like going past 100, you end up encountering this really mysterious boss that's really difficult on this almost like at the same level as the no-skin man, but with more oppressive moves. And of course, as the name suggests, it's a female being that tells you that you aren't even worth the sole of their shoe, which is honestly really hurtful. But from what we were able to infer is that she is Noire's mother. in Noire's diary, one big point that Zig and Noire talk about is just, her and being in the other room and possibly causing Noire distress. Oh, wait, that's the end of that, but it's really hard to there's not really too much you can go off of here, but it really does make sense when it comes to Noire's lore because, the life that she leads, she isn't really in a good place. She is working long hours at a shift at a retail with a boss she doesn't like, and she even just resorts to alcoholism. And you even throw abuse on top of that from her mother, which honestly just is really tragic. Again, there's not really too much to go off of, but you can tell that this whatever woman they're alluding to in Noire's Dream Diaries is causing just complete distress between Zig and Noire, and it's just easy to just point to it being her. All right, so next up we have Luna. It's honestly Luna's one of the characters in this game that we know the least about. She's even a playable character yet. There's really not much that we know about her. And when you look at some of the Steam discussions, the dev does mention that Lunas is essentially this cheat mode character, and that's really about it. But what's interesting is that throughout all of the games that Noeye-soft has released, Luna has kind of been a part of them, even just if for being there in in the files, she's just there. And the role that she plays in this game and in No Skin kind of seems to be similar, where she's just there and she's there to help you along your journey. Now, the reason why she's this low on the tier list is not only her history with the other games, but something else that actually leads further down the iceberg, just on who she might actually be. Like in this game, she has no problem saying that her name is Luna and that, you know, get all those aspects about her that she really doesn't know what's going on. Yeah, it's just so odd that she's really finding herself in those places. Again, a really mysterious character, and just the abilities that she's given in No Skin just kind of make her seem like, you know, the stand up warrior for the moon goddess, and just her whole role with being involved with the moon goddess and even having her own evil versions that appear. All right, so next up we have Phantom Luna. I bet you don't even know who Phantom Luna is. I sure as heck did not. When I saw the sprite for Phantom Luna in the files, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is a crazy character. I can't wait till I get to see her in the full release, but it turns out she was in the game the whole time for as long as Luna's been a playable character. Essentially, the way that you encounter her is that you have to, just as you encounter her by reaching the very end threshold of the game past the 100 at 148, you encounter Phantom Luna by doing the exact opposite, where you're at the threshold of the game on the negative side, where you're in a 460 negative 464, which actually takes a really long time, a lot of play time for you to even reach that far down, which I kind of feel why it took so long for her to be discovered. She was teased so long ago, and yet she was only recently discovered. And the whole thing, it's just that whole idea of her being one of the craziest secret characters that you can encounter, and it's the whole scare factor that she gives off. She has her own song that plays, and while she is actively trying to kill you, you have the option to just straight up escape with no problem at all. And it's just that state where you're really just held accountable, that this isn't just a game. You're toying with Luna's livelihood, like you're making her suffer. And it's just jarring to see the extent to which you see her, and you've died so many times that she's just re- it's just you can't even put it to words, and really gets you thinking about the game differently. So next up we have the world tinged in red. And this is actually, I'm referring to the secret minigame that you can get in this game where if you manage to kill Phantom Luna, which is I didn't think was possible because she's a ghost, but she does have that one little health point there. If you attack enough times, it eventually strikes, and what you get is a cutscene where it's similar to one of the unexpected events where you see like Noeye-soft just kind of wandering around the apartment, and it's just sort of the same thing where everything just does not make sense at all. You see the moon goddess just split in two and spill all this sludge, which ultimately ends up becoming the three playable characters of the game. It's hard to make that out, but for the center one, you can definitely tell that it's Root. And it's really confusing for what goes on, but for the minigame itself, you play what seems to be like the very early concept for No Skin, where it's a lot more simplified. You're not really, you already have everything you need from the get go. All of the accuracy is 100, but you're facing off against these really symbolic creatures. You have the rhino carcass, the painting covered in blood, and even it's a French name, which translated is the origin of the world. And it just ties into those dialogues that the Crimson Dancers have, just alluding to them. Like they are all just tied to the origin or possibly even the meaning of life. And I think that's really interesting because that's kind of the whole direction that No Skin takes after this mini game. And what's interesting about the design of that final boss, like the origin of the world, you can see that it's a triangle, and it's when you really when the members of the Discord kind of just really analyzed it and kind of pointed out that it is a female reproductive organ, which kind of does exemplify, the origin of life being through reproduction and those means. But it is an interesting thing. It's a really cool thing to encounter. when uh, when my friends just first discovered this, it was really mind blowing on how there's just so much more to this game in terms of lore, yet it still feels like we don't have enough. All right, so that we're moving on to the final tier now. It's been a very long time, but I'm going to start off straight up with the copies. Now, one of the most dark things that I think about this game, aside from Phantom Luna, is just the encounters that you get where it is, you know, you get Luna as her just an evil alternate from another dimension, just speaking numbers at you. And there is Noire, who is just able to talk to you normally, but it's just, a reflection of yourself, but just having undergone just this horrible fate. And you learn that for Noire's case, it's just your punishment for dying in the previous run. This is essentially just what happened to the Noire that you had, like, before you died. And it's the things that they say that where it's honestly really saddening because if you look at a game like Hollow Knight, where if you die, you kind of just leave a wisp in your place that you have to go and slay to be able to progress back to the game, that kind of thing. That's necessary for progression. You don't really think of it as like a dark thing. Like it just seems like a necessary thing, and then you see Noire from an alternate dimension where it's just you can see you know that creepy look to her and how everything you knew about the moon goddess may have just been for naught. How she, the moon goddess, even allowed this to happen, which is kind of leading to that whole question on whether or not the moon goddess was evil. Like, why do these copies exist? Why is it that even though it's a dream, that when you die, those previous iterations just come back to haunt you? It's one of the biggest things when it comes to the scare factor of this game because it makes you realize that it's just so much darker than you initially thought. It may just be a game, but this is also like, livelihoods. There's things at stake here. So the main question is why couldn't the moon goddess just revive Nora as she was? Why did she have to just leave the copies to just exist in eternal suffering. And my explanation for that, like when you think a bit about it from a gameplay perspective, it really is realistically the first time that you're able to see Noire as a sprite, which, it's really cool at first because you really don't really know how Noire looks until you see Rugs's Dream Diary, which didn't come until a later update. And it's also just another secret character that's thrown out. It's like cool and scary at the same time. But if you really were to think about it like less from a gameplay standpoint, it seems like the moon goddess doesn't really have that kind of power to just bring people back. I assume it's more complicated than that. And when you think it's a game, like you really think that this stuff shouldn't be happening, but it is, and it reminds you of like even if you go to all the deep dark creepy pasta stuff like MS is Blue, which is like a Team Fortress 2 fan made film, versus has all of that, the twists about what you thought was true and all the you know the scary things that come out of what everything's that you know and trust. I know that you may not a lot of people may know about that, but it's just giving me that vibe of something that seems usual to us, but when we really look at the inner workings of it, it's just so much darker. And that's just the whole vibe that I get from these copies. Like as for Luna and Root isn't really, she doesn't have her own copies because she's from another world. It really is just seems to be Noire and Luna who are more closely connected or being recruited by the moon goddess. And it for Root and Luna, it really just seems to be they're there in the game to just be that method for you to unlock them as playable characters. But for Noire, it's more unique because it's a secret encounter. And I've been rambling about this for too long, but it when you think about it in all other aspects, it's one of the most disturbing things about this game. All right, next up we have Monica. And out of everything that this demo provides, all the content, it's pretty much enough for you to be able to explain everything that's going on in the game. I imagine that the full game is going to be so much different, but just in terms of what's going on in this demo, it already paints a picture of everything that's going on. But for one aspect of this game is this name drop, Monica, which is tied to Rugs. In the intro cutscene, there is this drama going on where, Rugs mentions a name Monica, whom of which, their relationship does not seem to be going well. You can kind of just infer this in how she brings Ester, who is also involved in the drama. She's kind of placing blame on her for, oh, Monica found out about this. And it's interesting to see that Monica is just a common name between the friend group. Like I don't think Noire knows because Noire is us and we don't know. But you would just brush it off at that point where it's just some name drop and that kind of throws in this this it's just a relatable thing, like something that really sets the mood, like you're in Earth, life is normal and there's drama going on about other people, that sort of thing. I lost the word for that, but yeah, you would just brush it off as some random mention that has no significance. But in Ruggs's Dream Diary, she's mentioned again, where if you read through Ruggs's notes, he mentions having a moment with this girl named Monica, which may have even been romantic at some point. But as you see in the intro cutscene, it really didn't seem to pan out very well. Like the Dream Diaries are certainly like they're from the past, from the current events of the game, but it is pretty difficult to draw. But that's just the way that seems to be the most correct. And what's crazy, like again, you have all of these obscure characters in this game. You have just that NPC in Noire's Dream Diary. You have the mysterious girl. You have the girl who saw the light. Like these characters really have nothing about them, but through the game's lore, you're able to decipher their true identity. We know that the mysterious girl is Mary's sister, that the girl who saw the light is Nadine's sister, that Zig is Noire's brother. And it's crazy because these are characters that we should really know nothing about, but we ultimately find out that they have their own sprites in the game and even play a role in the game, yet except for Monica. All we really know about her is just that text. And the reason why she's so far down on the list not because we don't really have an explanation for her, but it honestly seems like in the full game, it I don't even think that she's going to be there, as an inserted character, because we already have Ruggs's dream diary there as it is, and it doesn't seem likely that the full game is gonna expand more on that. I could be wrong. Like we could just randomly see a girl named Monica pop up. But my one of my biggest far-fetched theories that I've, in all my time looking at and interpreting this game was the idea that Monica is secretly Luna. I'm fairly certain that's just a really far-fetched theory, and it's easy to just go for the explanation that Monica is just some character that the developer threw in just for the sake of, pulling together a narrative and some drama to get the game going. But when you really think about it and go for that idea that it's not just a coincidence, you can just really see that there's a lot of things that we don't know about Luna, and it would really add a spark to her character if it was true that she really was this girl named Monica who at some point knew and even had a relationship with Ruggs. This may seem far-fetched, but there's a lot of similarities that Monica and Ruggs have, namely there's them being smoke smoking, and it, just as Ruggs delivers verses, we see in this game Livid Meadow, we see Luna just kind of reciting these things that are like echoes from the outside world, like do you like gummy bears, that kind of thing. It's not really something that really puts them together, but like in the case for Luna, we essentially know that she's been in all of these games and she's just been there along every step of the way. And it would make sense that she was also involved in the friend group, but just in secret, because we know that she's not even there and that Noire doesn't even know who she is. Like Luna and Noire, they just know each other as just being similar to each other, nothing more than that. And it would be very interesting and add just this needed um, lore drop for Luna that really places her in this game and makes her more than just a cheat mode character if she was adopting this name Monica to just get close to the friend group and even spy on them. It is a very far-fetched theory, but I honestly, if you look at her like in her design, she really looks like a Monica. I'm sorry. Like she may also look like an Ashley, but when you use the name Monica and just look at Luna's sprite, it just, oh my gosh. Yeah, I really feel that I might just start calling her Monica, just, without thinking much about it. It's a big theory, but it really is. I really don't really seem to have an any other explanation than those two that I just mentioned. And for the final topic on this list, it is SPR underscore no underscore skin underscore smile underscore 3. I didn't have to do the underscores, but that's just a file name for an image that I feel is one of the most concerning finds in all of No Skin. Now, I'm gonna pull up the image, and it is really creepy. It's an image of a woman, and it really just makes me wonder, like, what on earth was this here for? It's not there in the game at all. Like, I personally thought that if you were, if you look at Undertale, if you mod the game, Sans is there at the end saying, "Oh, you dirty little cheater," and I kind of feel like if you did something in No Skin, you just get this jump scare of, this woman as rightful punishment for messing with the game. I honestly really wanted it to be like that, but it really seems like this is just a scrapped sprite. The purpose of it is just completely unknown, but it is just the art style is just so different from the sprites that we're used to seeing in the game. It's just really unusual, which is why it's at the very bottom of the iceberg. Even though it's not in the game, it's just there, and it really adds this eerie sense to the game. It's really cryptic, and it's you can't really infer much from it other than it being just existing, being whether or not it's scrapped or whatnot. It's just I don't really think it matters, but it's one of the most chilling discoveries I've made just in my time with this game. And yeah, that does it for the No-Skin Iceberg. I feel that I did not really address everything that I needed to, but I talked my throat out so far. And now I'm going to move on just to my thoughts about No-Skin as a whole. With I know you're not I don't think you're gonna believe me on this, but I reached a point where I've amassed 40 hours on No-Skin, and this is for a demo, mind you. Like, could you imagine that? I must be the craziest person alive to have spent this much time on a game. So that definitely has me and the Discord just really hyped for this full release. And I definitely hope that, the dev takes their time and they're set a really good roadmap. I honestly think it's going to be really great. But I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, every time I boot up the game now, it really seems like I get this anxiety from playing the game now. Which seems unusual because, when you play a game for a long time, you get used to it and, it's not scary anymore. But now I get this feeling that every run that you do, it really is just, no matter how good you are, you could lose. And it's that just repeat. I've been doing challenge videos and have even attempted to do a speed run of the game. And I will tell you, it only took one attempt for me to just feel like I was done. That one run was the craziest run that I've ever played in all of my time with this game. And at one point, it's a no-brainer when you encounter the hanging man to cut him loose, but in that run, I chose not to. Like, can you imagine that? Just that thought process where you do something so heartless, it just brings in that whole idea of morality in the game, which I really hope the full game explores because it's really eye-opening. It adds some emotional. You make some emotional decisions from what it seems like, even though it's just a game. And there's just it's so many things about the game that have changed. It's honestly, I think it's one of my favorite indie games of all time. It is like in that meme where you get that $1 game and it turns out to be a banger. Except for in this game, I got it for free and I donated those bucks. So yeah, heck yeah, I'm definitely down for that. And now I'm moving on to the breakdown of Livid Meadow, the game that was just played right here. And I really like how No-Skin just kind of expands on the whole dynamic from Livid Meadow, kind of just shifting away from the gameplay aspect of it and just focusing more on the whole plot, the mystery, and all of the characters. And I think that No-Skin is like an excellent example of all of that and the way it delivers it. And for Livid Meadow, when you look at the lore, none of it makes sense. Why are you just here in this swamp? You don't. It's just you and one other partner in this abandoned area that seems to have so much going on, and there's all these characters that make no sense. You're interrogating a man on the rooftop of a destroyed building, and he's not even handcuffed. Of course, there's something going on here. It's not really just a simplistic view where you're just kind of rushing along the plot, and it really is just playing out that way. But I feel that this is just root going through the afterlife. I don't know if you know about this game. It's a Japanese game by the name Go Home, where you play as a little girl who is, yes, trying to go home, but in in all a bunch of twists and turns within the game, the truth is that she's dead and she doesn't realize that she's dead. So she tries to live a normal life as if nothing had went on, yet she's just completely unable to with all the like apparitions within the afterlife just trying to help her come to the truth that she's dead, which ultimately does happen within the game. It's a saddening thing, but it's the truth. And I kind of feel that that's what goes on with Root here in Livid Meadow. It's really hard to decipher what really went down. You're investigating a murder that you don't even end up solving, because I believe that the murder itself was either Root or Door, or it could even be both of them. Now, as for the sake of, the deer-headed man being this manifestation of guilt, from what it seems like for Root, mind you, it's really hard to piece together, like, what did Root do? Why is she in this? Like, whether or not she was hung as a means of suicide or by the deer-headed man, it's really hard to put together. But from all the cutscenes that you see between Meadow and Door, who are also seem to be manifestations of the characters that you see, the police officer Door and regular Root, it really just seems like a past version of themselves. You get through this whole cutscene where the two of them are chilling by the tree, talking about happy memories within this forest, which is bustling with life. About them seeing that deer, the really beautiful deer in the meadow, and the whole poem with the the yellow snake eyes, which is reiterated throughout many instances of the game, even by a homeless man. And this kind of just alluding to, calls from the outside world of Root, just trying to get her to remember that life that she lived that ultimately ended in tragedy. Now, what ended up going on is it's going to be really difficult to piece together, but my interpretation is that they had this whole plan between Root and Door that while Root was still working as a detective, Door was possibly relocated to, and she, like, as a work thing, and had to move away from Root, which is kind of why they explain, like, oh, when you return, it'll be happy, we may even start a family, that sort of thing. But we learned that this did not happen. And it's even possible that Door had died in the line of duty. Well, we know that Door is ultimately dead, but this guilt that Root feels, like, what is she guilty of? Well, it seems to be this guilt that she has for not really being there to stop him from leaving, which will ultimately lead to his death. And there's also this rare possibility that while on her work as a detective, well, she may have been pursuing a suspect in a murder case. Maybe she accidentally killed Door, just fatally shot him on accident. That is another thing to mention, because there's a whole symbolism behind, that whole thing with Root using a gun. And we even see him shoot Door, like the younger version of, the manifestation of Door in that interrogation. It's just completely brushed off. Like, even those guys shot, it's still acting like nothing happened. And that kind of just adds some significance that, from what seems like even a miscarriage of justice, even, on how Root just carried out, her job. It's really difficult to wrap around, but even once you reach the end of the game, you see that Root apologizes to Door, that she says it's her fault, which may have just, alludes to her guilt that she has for what transpired in his death, whether or not he died by her hands in an accident while on the job, or whether or not he was ultimately just killed in the line of duty. All of which, while he was in the line of duty. But it's really interesting because he just says that he's happy that she tried, and that's just where the game ends. And that's essentially what we see in No-Skin after you defeat Meadow. You know, the world just fades and that's it. But it's good to see that Root gets that sort of closure, like she's finally realized why she's going through all this, why the deer-headed man is after her and suddenly just wanting to, forcing her to, progress by crazy means, by even challenging her to a duel. As for the deer-headed man, he's just essentially that, in that saying with the livid meadow, the snake eyes, it's also mentioned that there's a deer, which is what the deer-headed man is inspired from. Yet that deer is just that manifestation of guilt that Root has, who purely exists just to push her to understand all that she's done, because she clearly doesn't know what happened. And that's essentially what his role is. He's definitely seems evil, but I guess that's one way that he successfully carries it out. It's a whole lot to unpack, but when you see with all of the other characters, Luna is a very curious case because she's just there all of a sudden. She's just chilling in a subway with the doors locked around her. It's a very odd case, but without Luna being there, Root would have been unable to complete her journey, which is kind of, Luna's whole role, just being there to help. Aside from us knowing nothing else about that. But one thing I really liked playing through this game was, aside from the amazing music, is just how much it connects to No-Skin with it. As you progress, it getting darker and more red as you get closer to the truth. And that's just essentially my whole breakdown of the game. I definitely feel that I could have done a better job, but there's so many confusing things to unpack from the game that I don't even think I'm nowhere clear to scratching the surface on what's really going on. But it's just that whole idea that Root is in the afterlife and she's coming to terms of what happened. The life that she could have had with a family, with kids, just replaced by these murderous machines that are out to kill her. It's just this weight of, this life that she could have had crashing down on her. And Meadow's just there kind of just saying, like, you did this to me. I could have been happy, but whatever you did, I couldn't get that. And now, the final boss battle and all that. So I don't really know how long I've been talking for, but that's really everything I have to say. I'm very certain that I've covered all that I really could. There is like references from other games aside from No-Skin and Livid Meadow that are by Noeye-soft that have some pretty interesting things about them, but I really doubt that they have as much of a connection to the whole, idea that Livid Meadow and No-Skin have. It's just really unique, and yeah, that's about it. My throat is burning. And I didn't really think I'd be talking for this long, but I really hope that I wasn't rambling for too long. Hey, yo, bro. Noeye-soft, yo, bro. Like, keep up the amazing work. Take as much time as you need. It's gonna be great. And I'm sorry. I know you posted that image from when you opened the files of the game saying, please don't decompile. I took that to heart when I first saw that. And I'm sorry, okay, I'm sorry. Don't hold it against me, I promise. Also, oh my gosh, I know I didn't talk about the frogs, but I think they're my favorite characters of the whole game because they're just so adorable. I would just love to pick up a frog and take it with me to protect it and have it eat all of the mosquitoes and the parasites and just, oh my gosh, I would love that if that was actually a thing in the game. But yeah, enough of me just nerding out about this game. Thank you guys so much for watching and bearing along with me because I don't even want to know the full duration of this, but that's everything. Bye.